and said, you know, we've got this meeting for planning of General Synod, and John Dorhauer is going to be with us. Do you think he'd want to go to Economo Walk with me? And I said, go for it. And he did, and you couldn't be more thrilled to have the general minister and president come and visit with you and tell you about the United Church of Christ. It doesn't get much better than that, but it's a tough act to follow. And of course, to talk with you tonight about the United Church of Christ Wisconsin Conference history, which is not the most rousing topic, but I'll try and keep it interesting with some stories along the way. If we could go to the next slide, that would be great, Carl. So many of you know, or I'm hoping you know, at least from last week's presentation, that we are a church that is really built on covenant agreements. We're congregations that have chosen to covenant with one another to become the wider church. And our church has some long, deep roots, as many of you know, from 4 different traditions. From the congregational, the English side of the tradition, the Congregational Church and the Christian Church, which had previously united together, and then the German Evangelical Church and the Reformed Church, which had previously united together. And then in 1957, came together as 4 denominations that to become the United Church of Christ. If you've seen our logo, you know that the logo is a cross with a crown, and it says, united and uniting. And I think in the United Church of Christ, we are still doing that in many, many, many ways. We are one denomination, but we are still in the business of trying to become united and uniting at every level of our denomination. And part of that is because we come together in covenant relationship. Each church is locally owned and locally operated and locally governed. But the wider church sets bylaws and practices for the denomination that have to be adopted at every single level of the church life. So every change that happens in the United Church of Christ has to be adopted at every level. So we're made up of delegates from all of the churches, from the conferences, from the associations that represent us at every level in which we have a formal covenant relationship. Does that make sense? Yep. So when I talk about the wider church, the United Church of Christ on a national level, the wider church can only speak to the local church. It can never speak for the local church, because every local church is locally owned and locally governed. And that means that, you know, you have control over your missions and your ministry and all of those kinds of things. So always trying to keep a balance in our united and uniting relationship between our autonomy and our covenant relationship with one another, and how we do that. And there are times where clearly the local church values its autonomy more than it does its covenant relationship. And there's a little bit of, what should I say, patterns that we've noticed over the years in that united and uniting kind of thing. The Congregational Christian Church, which was really born out of England but in New England, has a lot more of a spirit about it where it really highlights and values its autonomy. The German evangelical side of the tradition has always had strong covenant relationships and a respect for those covenant relationships, that they've often made big sacrifices for the covenant relationship. So it's always kind of a bit of a balancing act, walking a tightrope between who we are autonomously in each local church and who we are as the United Church of Christ in those covenant relationships. So you probably know that churches form together in a region to become an association, and then the associations become a conference. So the Wisconsin Conference is made up of four associations: the Northeast, the Southeast, the Southwest, and the Northwest of the conference. So when the Wisconsin Conference was formed, these were your congregational leaders: Jess Norenberg and George Now Burridge, one who was the superintendent and the other was the lay leader. The other thing that you need to know about our structure and our polity and how we do things, because we're a covenant relationship, we value representation at every level of our governance structure and every level of our committee structure, so that you will always have clergy on a board or a committee, and you will always have lay leadership from around the conference serving on every board and committee. And we try and keep a balance between clergy and lay people, and we also try and keep a balance between men and women serving on each of our boards and committees. Does that make sense? So I work with and serve both the Northeast Association and the Southeast Association. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I showed you the congregational Christian leaders. These were the evangelical and reform leaders. Paul Keel and John Shabe were represented the South Wisconsin E&R Synod and the North Wisconsin E&R Synod when the conference was formed. Next slide. The uniting meeting took place in two locations, Memorial E&R in Madison and First Congregational in E&R in Madison in 1962. Now, you think about that. The uniting meeting happened in 57, and it took until 1962, almost 5 years later, before the conference itself was formed. Next slide. So our first conference minister overseeing all of our churches and casting a vision was Clarence McCall, and some of you may remember him. 1963 to 1966 were his years as conference minister. Next slide. The conference office at that time was on Marshall Court in Madison. It was a pretty small office, and we had a pretty limited staff at that point. You'll remember in those early years were the forming of civil rights, and we had a student who, from Merrill in the conference, who went down and participated in the March on Selma. And Keith has shared his reflections. If you ever have an opportunity to look at some of that on the conference website, it's a really interesting story. One of the other things that happened during the 1960s was the birth of ecumenicism. So how we could participate and in events and conversations across denominations. Protestant and Catholic met at First Congregational in Wisconsin Rapids, where Ray Hernandez helped the youth have some of those conversations in the 1960s across lines. Interestingly enough, I came to the conference from the New York conference in 1995. Well, December of 1994, started at First Congregational in Appleton as their pastor in January of 1995. When I moved to Appleton, a member of the congregation asked me, "What side of town are you going to live on?" And I said, "What do you mean, what side of town am I going to live on?" Well, we ended up choosing a house over by Pierce Park, and they said, "Oh no, you can't live on that side of town. That's the Catholic side of town." This was in 95. I mean, and to think that ecumenical movement had been going on in full array since the 1960s. I found it really, really interesting. And of course, I wasn't going to choose a different place to live. The conference meetings were held in Appleton at Lawrence University. And you can see a picture of the chapel there. Then we got into the Ralph Lai years. By the way, everybody loved being at Lawrence and everybody hated being at Lawrence because there's this odd thing that happens during conference annual meeting is that we often get multiple days of rain. And so every time you had to go anywhere at Lawrence University, you had to go out the building and down the street and so on and so forth, where people are always complaining about how wet they were. So they both had this love-hate relationship with all those years that the conference annual meeting was held at Lawrence. Then we got into the Ralph Lai years, 1966 to 1981. Did anyone know Ralph? Anyone know him as your conference minister? He had a strong reputation, was beloved in the conference, and a great conference minister. The Lai staff included some well-known association ministers, because at that time, each association had its own minister. So Jim Savides, some of you may know the name Steve Savides. I served with Steve during his 8 years that I was there with him at First Congregational in Appleton. Jim, his dad, was the association minister in Northwest. Dick Weichel was the association minister in Southwest, and Roy Albersworth was the Southeast Association Minister. How many of you knew Roy? Anybody? Well, I'll bet you know his daughter, which is Debbie Payton. was Roy Albersworth's daughter. Deb and Tom Payton served the church, Congregational Church in South Milwaukee. And then Don Hinsey was the Northeast Association minister. And, you know, there were a lot of things that Ralph did, but one of the wonderful things that he did was to really beef up the conference newsletter and making sure that all of the events that were happening around the conference were open and invitational to the whole of conference, no matter what association you were a part of. He really wanted to build up the conference as the conference and not just your own little turf in your associations. The camps, as you well know, are a huge part of our wider church life. Both our camp at Moon Beach, which is between Eagle River and St. Germain. Anybody been to Moon Beach Camp? No? You have? You've gone through it. Well, you know, Moon Beach Camp has great camping programs, and if you've never been, you need to take advantage of camp at Moon Beach. And then a lot of folks have been to Pilgrim Center, which is across from where we hold conference annual meeting now at Green Lake. It's right on Green Lake, and a number of our youth attend and participate at camp at Pilgrim Center. Does First Congregational have a group of kids that go to Pilgrim every year?
Yeah, we have one of the bigger ones.
Okay.
Bigger group that goes. So we actually are taking 11 at the end of the month.
Wow, 11 kids are going to go.
Yeah,
Great. And do they go to the spiritual formation retreats too, Amy?
Yep.
Good. That's terrific. Again, a lot of lively issues during the Ralph Lai years came to conference annual meeting. One of the things that happens at conference annual meeting, beyond all the reports, which everybody loves to sit through, is an opportunity that if there are issues that the wider church as a whole needs to think about, embrace, struggle with, maybe take action on in some way, shape, or form, that those issues come before the body as resolutions. And each church has delegates from their church that are the representatives to our conference annual meeting. You could have anywhere from 2 to 4 delegates, depending on the size of your church, to go to conference annual meeting and represent the church. Now, I always used to say to our delegates, no matter what issue comes before you, you have to vote your conscience. You're not going to represent the whole church. You have to come and vote your conscience and trust that the Holy Spirit will be done with all of the delegates that are there. And so there were a lot, during the Ralph Lai years, there were a lot of issues that came as resolutions before the conference. In the last number of years, well, in the 22 years that I've been a part of the conference, there have been very few resolutions that have come before the whole body. I can think of 3 that have come before the whole body. One was the issue of being an open and affirming conference. Another was an issue of immigration, which we just approved a resolution about. And I think there was one other resolution that came before the conference. In the 22 years that I've been here, which is not very many. When I was part of the New York conference, I think there were like anywhere from 10 to 20 resolutions on the floor at every conference annual meeting. So it's a very different feel in that way. During those years, also international exchanges began to happen, which was the cornerstone of many of our partnerships that have grown in the conference. And then, of course, the conference has delegates that go to our General Synod meetings. Each conference, based on the size of their membership, has so many delegates representing each of the 4 associations in our conference that go to General Synod meeting every other year. So typically, delegate is chosen for 2 General Synods, which means you serve for 4 years, and represent the conference and are able to vote on issues that come before the wider church at General Synod. Does anybody know where General Synod's being held next? Amy does. Milwaukee, 2019. We are hosting General Synod in Milwaukee, and believe me, we are going to look for lots of volunteers. I think the local arrangements committee from our last General Synod in Baltimore said 365 volunteers are going to be needed to host General Synod in Milwaukee. But we're very excited to do this, and it's the first time ever that we have hosted a General Synod. In 1981, Fred Trost became our conference minister, and Fred, how many of you know Fred? Anybody? Dave, you know Fred. That's because he was gone before you came. Right. Yeah. Fred was a wonderful conference minister. He's still a wonderful man. I greatly appreciate Fred's gift as an orator. He is a preacher extraordinaire. No one that I have met as a conference minister has had quite the skill set to weave words and weave wisdom as Fred Trost. And he has the voice to go along with it, this big, booming bass voice. He is an exceptional theologian. He was very excited to try and make Wisconsin Conference for a number of years the Craigville Colloquy of the Midwest, and really pushed to make sure that Lakeland in particular became a site for theologian and theological colloquy, and Fred did a marvelous job. Beyond that, I also say that he is a man of not only deep faith, but wonderful pastoral skills. There isn't anything that I've ever done in the life of the conference, and I have served at, I think, every level of our church and ministries around the conference, that I didn't get a personal thank you note from Fred about. He always, no matter how small a task or how large a task I did, and he was like that with absolutely everyone, he wrote personal thank you notes for everyone and took time to notice when you did something special. There were a number of special services at one point that I had put together for our conference annual meeting, and every year I would get wonderful thank you notes from Fred. So he's beloved. Our Lay Academy began in the Fred Trost years. Bonnie Van Overbeek was the first director of our Lay Academy. And our first class of Lay Academy grads, because it's a 2-year program, the Faith Formations 1 and 2, graduated 38 students in that first Lay Academy class.
Jane, I mean to interrupt. Bud Holland, who's a member of our church, was one of the graduates of that first class.
Bud Holland was a member of the first class, yep. And Lay Academy continued to grow under Gail O'Neill. She expanded our Lay Academy program to include a 3rd and 4th year. The 3rd year focuses on lay leadership skills that are needed in the local church. And then she added a 4th year, which really introduces pastoral skills. Because one of the things that we have begun to see, especially in the Northwest Association, but also in Southeast and Northeast and Southwest associations, that there are certain settings in which an ordained minister cannot be called. A small rural community, a community that the membership has shrunk so that they can't afford a ordained pastor. So we have called some of our Lay Academy grads to serve these local churches in addition to their other vocations. Then in 2012, Debbie Payton, Roy Albersworth's daughter, continued to grow our Lay Academy program to include an advisory team that oversees our Lay Academy program. At our 20-year celebration in 2015 of Lay Academy, you can see all 4 directors of the program, including Tisha Brown, who we're going to see in a minute, up close. They had this wonderful celebration at conference annual meeting. And when Debbie asked if all of the Lay Academy grads would stand, there were hundreds of people who stood up. Our Lay Academy program, I want you to know, is coveted around the United Church of Christ in lots and lots and lots of places. And it has served as a model for other conferences about the Lay Academy program. And there you see Tisha Brown, who is our current director of the Lay Academy program. Last year we graduated, or 2016, we graduated 48 students from Faith Foundations and 31 students from year 3. So you can see that the program continues and continues to grow. And we're always encouraging folks that if you want to go deeper in your faith, come to Lay Academy. It's over weekends throughout the year. There's wonderful professors that contribute to it, and it's a great program. I know First Congregational here has graduated a number of Lay Academy folks.
And we'll have another one this summer when Amy graduates.
And you'll graduate this summer. That's great.
And we're also working on a year 5.
Yes.
So that's going to be kind of exciting.
It is. We're not quite sure how that's shaping up yet. We are in conversations, just so you know, with the Minnesota Conference in a collaborative effort. So we're working on that and seeing how that blossoms. Our ecumenical and international partnerships were really solidified during Fred Trost's years. Our German partnership, our theological colloquy with the Hondurans, the partnerships in Haiti, in Mexico, in Great Britain, in Egypt, in France, and especially our partnership with Germany that is just an amazing, amazing partnership and continues to be. I was at one of our churches in Northeast for a celebration with our German partnerships and a delegation of youth that came over from Germany. And it was wonderful to be with them for a few days and hear their stories about their home churches and what the German partnership has meant to them. During Fred's years, we decided to move out of that little teeny tiny office and build the office in DeForest, Wisconsin. And you can see a photograph of the office on the right. It's meant to be a broken wings of a dove. One whole wing signifying our wholeness, and the other our brokenness, and how we live together in both wholeness and brokenness as God's people. This is the chapel area in the conference, and you see our communion table there. You're welcome to come and have meetings at the conference. Get a chance to explore the space and enjoy. And then the bell that we brought from the old conference office. A couple of the stained glass windows, the whole dove and the dove with a broken wing. And then it just gives you a view of the hallway going down one side with meeting rooms, and then the baptismal font at the entryway. Sunset on the Trost Center. I don't get to hang out there except about once a month. Most of the time I work from my home in Appleton. We moved the meetings from Lawrence University to Stephen Point in 1996, and we were there for about 10 years. The great thing was you didn't have to go outside during the rains. We could just go from meeting room to meeting room to meeting room for the whole weekend, and if it was raining and pouring, so be it. If you wanted to get outside and it was a break in the weather, take it full advantage of it. The Holodome at Stevens Point went through a number of transitions, and we stopped meeting there in 2006. Not 2006, 2000, go back one. Yeah, 2006, okay, I was right. At that time, I worked tech at the conference annual meeting. So I created all the PowerPoint stuff for worship. I ran all the business portion of the meeting from the back. Well, I was up on a raised platform in the back of this ballroom that was turned into our meeting space. And it had been pouring all weekend long. I mean, just pouring, pouring, pouring. I'm sitting at the back of the room, and I noticed the ceiling begin to buckle. And I yelled to Dave Moyer, who was conference minister at the time. I yelled at him and I said, "Dave, everybody needs to go to the sides now." And, you know, I fortunately had a mic so that I could get everybody's attention. And he just glared at me like, "What are you talking about?" And the next thing you know, the entire ceiling came crashing down in the middle of our annual meeting. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but that was the last year we had annual meeting at Stevens Point. Dave Moyer became a conference minister in 2001. He had served as association minister for the Northwest for many, many years. And it was a great fit. So since the disaster in Stevens Point, our meetings got moved to the Green Lake Conference Center, which is great because there are wonderful grounds at the Green Lake Conference Center to roam around and take advantage of in between meeting times and workshops. Our camping program has remained strong during these years, and even up to now. In 2009, the Ralph Lai Chapel was completed and dedicated at Pilgrim Center. And it's wonderful. It overlooks Green Lake. It's an absolutely beautiful chapel. In the carpet is a labyrinth that people can walk. But you can also, put chairs and tables on it, so it's very versatile, wonderful place. Many of you are familiar that we have done a number of things in the camping program to both improve the facilities at Pilgrim Center and at Moon Beach. There are 3 new fully winterized cabins now at our Moon Beach camp, which is terrific. And at Pilgrim Center, we have expanded the whole dining room and winterized the part of the dining room at Nuremberg that was not winterized at all, and also redone Fayetteville and added 1 other new cabin as part of all of that. So, conference leadership, Clarence McCall, Ralph Lai, Fred Trost, David Moyer, and our conference minister today, Franz Riegert. So those are your conference ministers, and each has brought different skill sets and different vision to the conference as it has adapted over the years. Our conference staff in the 1960s included a whole host of other folks. Ray Hernandez, who served in our youth program, and now Lisa Hart does our youth ministry program. There were Obed Halfland, who served in the camping program, Helen Barnhill, who was the moderator during the 1970s, Ree Hale, many of you knew Ree, who did our outdoor youth and young adult ministries, Ginger Long, who was assistant to the conference minister from 1981 to 1994. Ginger was also part of the arts committee. So if you ever have an opportunity to go to the conference center in DeForest, I want you to take notice of all of the fabric arts that are a part of that conference center. And for many years, there's still an arts committee that works on the stage work for our conference annual meeting. But Ginger in particular, Ginger Long and Gail O'Neill and a number of other people, Chris Krumnauer, were all part of these fabulous arts committee. And they've done the fabric art that hangs in our conference center, but also in Pilgrim Center. It's the fabric art that you see hanging in Pilgrim Center was one of the gifts that. And Jackie Mitchell, who was the assistant to the conference minister for both Fred Trost and for David Moyer. Jackie died a while back, and your church was gracious enough to host her memorial service, for which I was eternally grateful. I worked pretty closely with Jackie over the years. Bonnie Paulson, who was our business manager for many, many years and commuted during the last part of her tenure, all the way from Pennsylvania to Wisconsin to finish up her term. And Peter Munkries, who was our Christian education or lay life leadership for many, many, many years, 1962 to 92, 82 to 92, yep. Mary Knack, who's now retired, who served on our church and society and mission education, and Perry Bell, who was our mission and stewardship person for many years. And then our Northwest Association ministers, Jim Savides, Dave Moyer, Jenny House. Southeast were Roy Albersworth, Bob Horst. Some of you may know Bob. Bob is now retired and lives at, what's the name of the retirement facility near McQuantico?
I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank.
Okay. And then Tom Benz. And then Northeast, Paul Ohm, Don Hinsey, Joan Sulser, and Art Willie. And then in the Southwest, we have only had 2 association ministers, Richard and Bob Mutton. In 2012, as OC to WM dollars decrease, the conference needed to restructure. And so we closed all of the association offices, which is why I now work out of my home when I'm not on the road, and had 2 associate conference ministers. Ken Ulrey was the interim, serving the Southeast and the Northeast associations, and Becky Johnston, I'm sorry, Southeast and Southwest, that's a mistake on there. And Becky Johnston, who served Northeast and Northwest. So we divided the state this way. But it didn't really work well. Because why? Our road systems all go this way. All the major interstates go north and south, not east and west. So it made it very difficult to keep the travel up between 2 associations. Now we restructured again in 2014, knowing that it really was very difficult with just 2 associate conference ministers. So we put 1 associate conference minister back in the field. And Joanne Thompson essentially gave up her position at the conference. Joanne has been on conference staff for many, many years. She has been the one in charge of all the church renewal and development, and did a fabulous job in that role. She accepted Franz's challenge to come back out into the field and be an associate conference minister and serves the Southwest Association. She also is in charge of our community of practice and oversees our entire community of practice program. For those of you who don't know, community of practice is the professional support and development groups for all of the clergy. So when a new clergy person comes to the conference, they are assigned a community of practice group with whom they journey alongside other clergy in both a supportive role and also a development role. Rob McDougall is our associate conference minister serving the Northwest, and he also has some specialty program issues in rural church ministry and in retirement for our clergy. And then, as you know, I serve Northeast and Southeast associations. I am the one who is always in the car. I think I logged 31,000 miles last year traveling around to be of assistance to our churches during times of transition, during times of conflict, as well as just times of celebration and being with you at anniversary celebrations, at the calling of your new minister, and so on and so forth. I also oversee a program that I put in place shortly after coming on staff called the Conflict Transformation Team. We have 2 people from each association who we trained at the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center in how to help congregations manage and transform conflict. I get more calls about that than anything else other than search and call for new pastors. So I thought it was important that people have more people available to them to do conflict transformation. And indeed, since our team has been in place only a year, I have 6 different places where our team is being utilized. We also have on staff Vicki Graff, who is Director of Finance and helps churches with their health insurance piece. Tracy Hauge, who's our Assistant Director of Finance. And then, next slide, please. Deb Simon, who's our Director of Communications and Technology. Nola Rissi-Connolly is our Program and Communications Specialist. And anything technical, Nola's your go-to gal. Next slide. Lisa Hart, who is our Associate Conference Minister. She's the Associate to Franz, and she also heads up not only our youth ministry program, which she had been doing previously, but she has overseen our task force for immigration, for racial justice, and putting all those kinds of pieces together. And Tisha Brown, who is our leadership development for adult faith formation. She not only oversees the Lay Academy and this new process with Minnesota, potential partnering together, but she also heads up our 5 Practices program, which is a program for congregations who want to go deeper in their spiritual growth and development. And Susan Taylor, who is the person that you will almost always talk to first when you call the conference office. She is our administrative associate, but she is Rob and Joanne and my right hand. We couldn't do our jobs were it not for Susan. She helps in the search and call coordination of things. And, you know, I have 25 churches right now in search between Northeast and Southeast. And so Susan is my right-hand person for all of the search and call. Oh, keep going. As I said, there are a lot of partnerships that were really solidified under Fred Trost's leadership and continue to this day. We have campus ministry at both UW-Madison, at River Falls, and at UW-Stout. We also have partnerships with colleges, UCC colleges, Lakeland University, which is near Sheboygan, Northland College, which is up in Ashland, and Elmhurst College in Elmhurst, Illinois. And then our seminaries, Chicago Theological, United Theological, and Eden Theological, which are all the Midwestern seminaries. We call them Q, Chicago United and Eden. The Q seminaries, we have a strong partnership with. In fact, our Dave is wonderful in sitting on our church and ministry team for the Southeast Association and brings a lot of experience, having done that in Florida as well. But we're in the midst of a huge transition with clergy and the manual on ministry, which is still in this transition period. One of the parts of the calling system for our pastors and authorization is that we are transitioning ordination requirements so that there will be traditional students who will go through seminary for 3 to 4 years of seminary and be ordained in a traditional route. But we have so many second career people who are feeling the call to ministry that as our churches shrink in size, there's no way that they could afford to pay our pastors at the level that would allow them to pay off seminary debt. And many of them have bachelor's and master's degrees in other vocations that it makes sense for them to think about what are the skill sets that they need to develop to become a pastor. And maybe they don't need a full 3-year MDiv requirement. They may come through what we call a multiple path to ministry route. Well, the question that begs for us is, how are we going to develop a spiritual plan for each one of these multiple path candidates for ministry? And how are we going to assess where they are going to be and in making the marks and the skill sets that they need for ministry in the local church? So early on, I went to Eden and said, you need to help us here. We need to develop some tools together that can help us both develop spiritual plans, so it's just not on individual church and ministry teams, but also some assessment tools. And we are now one of 3 conferences participating with Eden in a pilot project for which they have a grant from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to, not the Robert Wood Johnson, sorry, the Lilly Foundation, in order to develop these tools that will be used across the denomination. So I'm very excited about that. I'm very excited to kind of gotten on the bandwagon early and gotten the Wisconsin Conference involved in that. Next slide. We also have all of these partnerships with churches around the world. And it has been a delight to see each of these partnerships grow in different ways. Our justice ministries in the conference have come from grassroots efforts up. So all of these committees represent our justice ministries and justice efforts throughout the conference and have partnered with conferences across the Midwest and across the nation to bring in best practices, policies, advocacy tools in the development of those ministries. We also have a strong relationship with the Council of Health and Human Services, the Wisconsin Council of Health and Human Services. Each one of these agencies is part of. So Cedar Communities, which is one of our retirement facilities, Crossroads, Emmaus Homes, Fairhaven Senior Citizens, Nuclearis, Orion, Family Services, Back Bay Mission, which is in Mississippi, Biloxi, Mississippi, that serves the poorest of the poor, and has done so for many years. Park Edge Preschool, which is at Hales Corners out in Milwaukee area, is one of our stellar health and human agencies, and just got an award as a preschool. The Retirement Housing Foundation, which includes 4 housing facilities across the conference. So the question is, how can you help? How can you partner with us in the conference? First and foremost is to continue to be informed. There's lots of information on our website for you to learn more about each one of those ministries, each one of those partnerships, and more about the conference. So continue to be aware and spread the word about what is the UCC about here in Wisconsin. And support our ministries, not only with our church's wider mission dollars, which you help support the conference. And if Franz didn't tell you, the majority of your OCWM dollars stay in Wisconsin. And a small percentage of those dollars go to national. So you need to know that when our church's wider mission dollars are coming up, it is about our ministries here in Wisconsin. You may want to volunteer. Volunteer with one of our partnerships, volunteer with one of our justice ministries. You may just want to volunteer in being on one of our committees throughout the conference. But feel free to, ask your pastor, ask me about those ministries and how you might get involved. And we do have representation at every level of our conference, for which we are always looking for great people to serve. And then continue to give generously. Give generously to our conference programs, to our camps, to OCWM, because we are the conference and we are one church, united and uniting in many, many different ways. So, questions that you have?
How many are expected in 2019? I mean, they're coming from all over the world. How many people are expected to come to that?
So, General Synod typically will range about anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 people. Sometimes more than that. I'm always embarrassed to say that the Hawaii conference gets the most people to come, and we had an opportunity to have General Synod in Hawaii, and National ended up turning it down because it was so expensive. But you know what? Those churches raise money for their lay members to come, even if they're not delegates, to just be at General Synod meetings. So we can have anywhere from about 4,000 to 5,000, I would imagine. There have been times in my 35 years as a pastor that we have hosted General Synod with the disciples of Christ. And in fact, I think we did that in Minneapolis. In fact, I know we did that in Minneapolis. And we had like over 10,000 people at that General Synod. It was awesome. It was just amazing to see the church at work in that large a scale. And because, not everybody knows what the United Church of Christ is, or who we are, or what our core values are. So it's lovely to see the church presence in a major city like that, and have people would just occasionally, ask us, well, what's going on in there? What is this group about? And we have the opportunity to share. Other questions? Yeah?
Let's see if I understood something. The persons who are the second career people who don't have the resources or the time to do the traditional MDiv, will they then be serving those small congregations?
They could be serving large congregations too. We don't, you know how calls work, right? With a church. A church will form a search committee, as you most recently did, and you will get profiles from across the denomination, both people who are just interested in coming to Wisconsin that may not know our churches that we pass on as associate conference ministers to the local church, or others who have seen your quote-unquote marketing piece from the national church and your profile and want to come. So it is, it's totally, we don't know where people are going to serve. What is a concern to us is that they have the skills to serve, and that they make the marks for ministry that will serve our church as well. And that for me is the real concern. Other questions? Have I bored you totally to tears? Okay.
So I assume that you are also on the committee for the conference next year? The Southeastern is part of that committee?
Yes. The Southeast Association, yes. So I can't go to all committee meetings in the life of the conference, but I've prioritized both church and ministry and the executive committee in both associations. And I do go to those meetings. And as well as conference staff meetings, which take 2 days. Can you believe that? Out of every month, our conference staff meets for 2 whole days. Field staff meets 1 day, and then the whole staff meets the second day. Other questions? No? Well, I'm happy to have been here and be with you, and Dave always knows how to get a hold of me, and I'm listed on the website, so if you have questions or concerns, feel free to contact me. Thank you. Oh, one last thing. I had Dave hand out to you. These are 4 history pages that one of our lay members in Eau Claire put together, and we celebrated the 60th anniversary of the UCC. So there are some wonderful highlights and details about the wider church as it has grown, and the Wisconsin Conference as part of that over the years, and I thought you might enjoy that. Thank you.